Ben Thompson, Stratechery, a look at the implications of OpenAI's ChatGPT, which has experienced an explosion of interest and led to questions about AI's impending impact on society. Related, James Vincent, The Verge, Stack Overflow temporarily bans users from sharing responses generated by ChatGPT, pending a final ruling. The site's mods say most ChatGPT answers are wrong. It's good to have a new story in the tech galaxy. The story around SBF, the story around Elon. It's nice to have a new thing to think about. ChatGPT, if you're not familiar, it's a way to enter a prompt and then have the machine spit out a response to your prompt in text form. People are using it to spit out narratives, right? A staunch conservative and a staunch liberal are arguing about taxation policy in the United States, describe the positions of each individual. I don't know, I've never written a prompt. That prompt probably sucks. But this related story about Stack Overflow not allowing entries from the output of this piece of software is particularly interesting because the examples that I've seen that are most compelling, and perhaps this is because I don't write code, is you can describe writing a piece of code in quote unquote standard human English, and the machine will spit back to you the code in whatever language you ask it for. So if you describe a CSS behavior that you want to apply to how a piece of HTML is rendered in a web browser, it will just write the CSS for you. That is really something. That is the leap from, I don't know how to write code, but I have a pretty good idea of what I want the end result to look like, to I now have basically a bespoke rough draft that I can go implement, and maybe it works perfectly and maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's maximally efficient and maybe it's not, but I have something to work with and fine tune in order to get my sort of final result. That's remarkable. And so it's not surprising that the tool and the business, which is the most common place where people who are writing code go to for guidance, for examples of how to accomplish a particular task in software, is putting the brakes on allowing these sorts of submissions. Not necessarily because they fear any sort of competition. I completely believe that the moderators of Stack Overflow take seriously the job of presenting accurate, most appropriate responses to people's queries. And so they would want to have some editorial oversight, if you will, of what shows up on that site. But this tool can, in some ways, act as a bespoke version of Stack Overflow. Again, is it going to be perfectly accurate? Is it going to be perfectly efficient? Of course not. But if you can sit in front of this tool and say, write the HTML for a basic blog template where each entry in the database has an excerpt from the top and a hero image and a headline, blah, 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 and you get some workable piece of output. I just don't see how that doesn't unlock a tremendous amount of potential for a tremendous number of people, which is why, to go back to the main story, Thompson is right to swing for the fences and say, we have to talk about the impact on society writ large, given that these tools are able to automatically, instantaneously produce outputs which human practitioners require significant amounts of time and effort to do. Like, that's a big deal. So let's hope that there's more critical engagement on this topic, because it's again, a story that gets us away from the guy who's messing with Twitter and launching rockets into space, or the guy who systematically robbed a bunch of people using cryptocurrency. Joshua Oliver, Financial Times. In an interview, SBF admits involvement in Alameda's largest uses of funds, spending $3 billion to buy out Binance's stake in FTX and pouring $4 billion into venture capital. Related, Ankush Kadori, New York Magazine. Unlike Bernie Madoff, SBF has not confessed to any criminal conduct, arguing FTX's collapse was purely sloppiness, meaning a U.S. prosecution could take some time. Also related, Stephanie Murray, The Block. SBF says John Ray III is not working with him in responding to messages, claims Ray made false statements and dodges questions on Alameda and loaning funds. The fact that we have a new story to talk about in the boom of innovation coming out of OpenAI that unfortunately does not obviate the scale of the narrative around Sam Bankman-Fried. I mean, I don't think it's worth spending a tremendous amount of energy trying to understand all of the nuance here, because it's going to take a while for fact-finding, discovery, legal action to, evolve. And B, what is there to say about this person and the actions of the business that they were running, other than it vaporized a bunch of people's money? I'm sure there are more relevant details around the how, the when, the who, the why of vaporizing a bunch of people's money, but that's what happened. And I just don't think, whether it's a month from now or 3 months from now or 6 months from now, we're going to have a whole lot more to say aside from these people vaporized a bunch of money. Simon Sharwood, The Register. Rackspace takes down its hosted Microsoft Exchange service and confirms a, quote, security incident caused an, quote, extended outage. Customers complain of poor support. This is certainly unfortunate. The business of providing a hosted exchange server is a critical business to, I'm sure, millions, tens of millions of people around the world. It's the tool that enables you to send and receive email, to have access to your list of contacts, to manage your time and commitments through your calendar. Exchange is a big deal, and not just for people like me who think that email is ripe for a resurgence and could be our savior from the death by 1,000 cuts that is instant message based communication. So my heart goes out to all of the end users and all of the engineers who are responsible for righting this ship, right? Resolving this issue. Sadly, though, I gotta wonder how much of a business is there for businesses like Rackspace to run Exchange when I have no doubt Microsoft will gladly spin up an Exchange instance for anybody. My immediate family has their own hosted Exchange instance. It's bundled inside of an office for families or small businesses thing, but it provides exactly the same functionality. And for the, less than 10 people who want email and contact and calendar hosting, it is completely adequate. And why would we, or a business of 10 people, or a business of 100 people, or a business of 1,000 people, go get that service from any entity but Microsoft? Maybe Rackspace was attempting to compete on price, but in the long run, are they capable of competing on price? So this is certainly a bummer, but I would imagine it's also a sign that this may not be a business worth being in unless you're the entity that builds the exchange software. Joe Rossignol, Mac Rumors, quo, mass shipments of Apple's AR/VR headset may be delayed until the second half of 2023 from the previously estimated Q2 2023 due to quote unquote software related issues. The notion that Apple's going to ship a pair of goggles, computer you wear on your face, is a lot of, sort of, there's a term in astronomy for trying to determine the nature of a body in space based on observing how energy moves around that space. I can't think of it right now, but that feels very similar to what's going on here. The whole planet of interest and attention around AR, VR, MR, XR, ER, all of the talk around a computing device that you wear over your eyes, it can't help but get sort of sucked into the what is Apple gonna do? Apple's building a thing. What is their thing gonna do? What is it gonna be? So it would appear that we're gonna find out sometime in the next calendar year. I continue to believe that using it as, quite frankly, a replacement for a home theater system is a use case that isn't getting enough attention. There's a tremendous amount of noise coming out of Meta around how it's going to replace your work laptop and it's going to just be a thing that you use to do work. Maybe, but the way that it's been popularized thus far is it's a tool for people to play games. Games include things like fitness. It's a jazzercise instrument. I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I've just always liked the word jazzercise. But I think that there are really two use cases that for me as an individual sound appealing. One of them, admittedly, is this work use case. I would love to be able to remove all possible distraction and just see a text editor floating in space. Maybe it's in a faux simulated environment and there's just a thing in front of me that I can type into. But the other category is I want to lay back in a comfortable chair and I want to watch a Stanley Kubrick film in the best possible environment. That to me is a thing that a computer you can wear on your face could deliver. But there's not a whole lot else to say. Software related issues, of course there are software related issues. There will be software related issues after it ships. There are Apple products which have been in the market for 10 years that still have software related issues. So whatever shows up Q2 of next year, second half of next year, we'll see. Reuters source: Foxconn plans to resume full production in its Zhengzhou plant in late December or early January after worker unrest. November revenue fell 11.4% year over year. All I really feel like is worth saying on this particular story is let's hope that full production is resuming, because whatever it was that caused Foxconn and the Chinese state to create worker unrest, because I don't think the workers just arbitrarily decided to be unrestful, has been resolved in an amicable, equitable way, and not because the workers who were, exhibiting unrest have been removed from the equation. I hope that's not it. I'm not trying to cast some specter that is it, but this is a delicate humanitarian issue. Parikshit Mishra, CoinDesk: USDC stablecoin developer Circle terminates its plan to go public via a SPAC merger with Concord Acquisition Corporation, announced in July 2021 by mutual agreement. Crypto Malarkey strikes again. The notion of a stable coin, it's a piece of cryptocurrency that is pegged to the value of fiat currency. It doesn't feel that different from, it doesn't seem to me, the extremely limited understanding that I have, that a piece of cryptocurrency that's pegged to the value of the US dollar does anything to address the issue, which is I can't get on my bicycle and go downtown and buy a sandwich with USDC. And so just because my USDC holdings can always be converted back into a currency that I can use to buy a sandwich, I don't see what the point is. Maybe the advantage is that you can stake, right? You can do yield farming and things like that with a stable coin. But aside from that, it continues to not solve the problem, which is I can't use it in any arena of my life that isn't playing on the computer. Tim Copeland, LeBlanc, orthogonal trading defaults on 8 loans to lending protocol Maple Finance, totaling $36 million, or around 30% of active loans on the protocol, likely due to FTX exposure. These pieces of the FTX story are the ones that remind me most of watching Adam McKay's The Big Short. One financial entity, unregulated bank, falling apart is not, despite the scale and scope in this case, the problem. The problem is it exists within an ecosystem, and its failure can infect or otherwise affect, or effect, affect is where you arbitrarily choose to behave in a way. You can effect other entities. The orthogonal trading entity can't pay back its loans, which represent a material percentage of all of the loans running on top of a given protocol in the cryptocurrency space, not because they did anything nefarious or that orthogonal trading's business wasn't sound in the abstract, but because it may have chosen to do business with FTX, which it also believed was sound, except that when it turns out that it's not, they get taken down with it, right? This is the, I'm kind of surprised I've never heard something like this before. Everyone has heard the phrase, if a tree falls in the woods and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? To me, that's not the issue. The issue is when a tree falls in the forest, how many other organisms does it take down with it? That's the issue. It's a forest. It's not one tree. So this will be, I suppose, one of the more compelling or impactful aspects of FTX's collapse, which is the ripple effect and the damage caused by all of the other entities that were, to one degree or another, intertwined with FTX. So we'll see what happens to orthogonal trading as a going concern, or the Maple Finance protocol as a going concern. Dan Milmo, The Guardian, a survey of 8,000 young people in 9 European countries finds 34% say they have pirated content, 27% have trolled someone, and 22% have incited violence, and more. Here you go. We are the content moderators. It's up to us. If a survey, admittedly not of a statistically significant portion of the European population, 8,000 people is 8,000 people. And a third of them, somewhere between a fifth and a third, have all knowingly stolen content that has a price tag on it that isn't quote unquote free, have intentionally behaved in a way to sort of incite the ire or aggravation of another person on the network, and have behaved in a way that would incite violence or could incite violence. There are no reasonable ways to maintain sufficiently open platforms and then create the mechanics that protect against this sort of behavior. I just don't believe that it's possible. I don't think that you can build a piece of software that can be utilized by millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions or billions of people that protects and sort of inures from, again, ballpark it, a third of a given demographic on that platform knowingly behaving badly. You can't build software to deal with that. The only way you deal with that is at a social level. The only way you deal with that is you educate people that this is not reasonable behavior. Will you reach everyone? Of course not. Is it reasonable to explore ways to moderate some aspect of the content programmatically or using software or other technology? Absolutely. Is it also reasonable to employ economic mechanisms like charging people money to gain access to a platform that's used by hundreds of millions or billions of people? Yeah, I think it is, because something tells me that of the cohort of young Europeans who were spending their time choosing to behave as bad actors in these systems, if they had to spend real money in order to troll enough people, I don't know that they would do it. Again, the content, like the pirating of content is a perfect example here. I am the last person in the world who wants to invoke the Steve was right shit, but he said when the iTunes store launched, you're not competing against record labels, you're competing against piracy. Like, that's the goal here. You have to create an experience that is so much better than piracy that people are willing to spend their money. It worked. I would be fascinated to see the results of a survey from, let's say, the same 8,000 young Europeans, and to specifically examine how many of them have built up music libraries that are 80% plus populated with pirated content. How many of them are storing gigabytes and gigabytes of MP3s versus paying Spotify N number of euros a month to have access to effectively every piece of recorded music ever. Asterisk, footnote. Like, that's the challenge, is build an experience that encourages earnest behavior, because you can't stop people who understand the definition of earnest behavior and then choose to be bad actors. Like, you can't prevent that in totality. David C. Brock Computer History Museum, a look at Adobe's Postscript, a desktop publishing programming language launched in 1984 as the Computer History Museum releases its source code. The Computer History Museum. Hey, Dad, I love you. Postscript, I mean, you want to talk about stuff that you got to be old enough to understand the value of. Like, before things like Postscript, the only physical output from a text editor on a computer was monospaced type, in many cases rendered on a dot matrix printer. Like, the ability to do page layout, the ability to have proportional fonts, right, where the W is wider than the E, that's the limit to my understanding of proportional spaced fonts. I mean, it enabled entire industries to move away from manually typesetting things, like having to use physical tools and cut pieces of paper and glue them together. It allowed for those workflows to move into a computer, an appliance, and for those things to be done in, not in the earliest of days, I'm sure. I was a child, so I don't have a strong recollection here, but ultimately in significantly more efficient and more effective ways, to say nothing of how collaboration was enabled, because all of what it took to lay out the front page of the New York Times, an issue of the New Yorker, like, pick your example, went from, a blotter or a wall to a floppy disk. Sneakernet being able to, like, take the file and physically move it to somebody else's device and then have them work on it. And then networking machines became something that was no longer the purview of, the government or academic environments. Postscript was a big deal. And the fact that its source code is released is cool in a very nostalgic way. I don't know. I look forward to reading David's piece to better educate myself on what I'm putting forward here, which is, it really unleashed a breadth and depth of capability that in no small part made computing as important as it is today.